Shalom Israel, it's Kazawan, and the name of this video is The Lunar Sabbath is Wrong. When is the Sabbath day? This is a highly requested topic. I avoided this topic for a very long time for many different reasons. However, everything happens at its appointed time. So here we go. Now, this is going to be a very long video. And because of this particular topic, I'm going to deal with the scriptures like normal, but I'm also going to deal with history and other documentation as well. Now, before I get into it, we have to understand why it's so important to understand when the Sabbath day actually is. This is Exodus 31 and verse 12. It says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying," verse 13, "Speak thou also unto the children of Israel." So the Most High told Moses to speak to the children of Israel. So this applies to every Israelite. It says, saying, "Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep." Watch this. "For it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am Yahweh that does sanctify you." So the Most High says that the Israelites are to keep the Sabbath throughout our generations. So this doesn't apply only to the Old Testament times. This applies to this very day. Verse 14, "Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people." So again, this is a very serious commandment. Now watch this, verse 15. "6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to Yahweh. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death." So here, the Most High gives us the cycle of how a biblical week is counted. 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. That is the cycle that the Most High set up in the very beginning. Any cycle that doesn't follow this cycle is not the cycle that the Most High gave us. The Most High gave us 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. That is what he gave us. Verse 16, "Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations." Watch this. "For a perpetual covenant." Perpetual means everlasting or never ending. So again, the Sabbath day applies to every single Israelite that exists. Verse 17, "It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever." There it is again. The Most High is making this point very clear. Watch this. It says, "For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." Again, we see the cycle repeated. 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. Any counting system that is different from this is not what the Most High established. That's very important. This has to be understood because there are many different doctrines about the Sabbath day and when it starts. However, if a Sabbath doctrine doesn't line up with this system, it is automatically wrong. Now, a perfect example of what I'm talking about is the lunar Sabbath doctrine. The lunar Sabbath doctrine says that the weekly seventh-day Sabbath changes days every month based on the day that the new moon comes in. In other words, if the new moon comes in on a Wednesday, then the Sabbath for that month is every Wednesday because it's based on the new moon. Now, I'm cool with a lot of brothers that follow the lunar Sabbath, but biblically, the lunar Sabbath is wrong. It doesn't work according to the system that the Most High established in the beginning. Let's prove it. This is a lunar Sabbath calendar. Notice that there are no names for the days of the week except for the Sabbath day. That's because the Most High never named any of the days of the week. He only named one day, which was the Sabbath day. Now, notice that the new moon day is separate from all the other days. The reason for this is, according to the lunar Sabbath doctrine, new moon day is the first day of the month, but it's not counted as the first day of the week because new moon day is its own day. In other words, new moon day is the first day of the month, but the next day after that, which is the second day of the month, that is the first day of the week. So with this system, the Sabbath days will always be on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th of every month. And then there will be 1 or 2 transitional days until the new moon comes in again, which will start a brand new month. And then the whole cycle repeats itself again. So the first is new moon day, and then you have 6 days of work, and then the 8th is the Sabbath, and then you have 6 days of work, and then the 15th is the Sabbath. And that system repeats itself until you get to the last Sabbath on the 29th. And then you get 1 or 2 transitional days before the new moon comes in again. That is how the lunar Sabbath calendar works. Now, that sounds good, but this system is flawed. Notice that I mentioned transitional days. Now, transitional days are the 1 or 2 days when the moon is black at the end of the month before the new moon comes in again. Here's the first problem of many. According to the lunar Sabbath doctrine, the transitional days do not count as days. According to that doctrine, those days are just transitional days until the new moon comes in again. So you don't count them as days. They're not actual days, even though they're called transitional days. Even though the sun still rises in the morning and you get up and go about your day, according to the lunar Sabbath doctrine, those days are not actual days. So basically what that means is you can have 1 or 2 full days that pass by before the new moon comes in again, and that 1 or 2 days is totally ignored as if they never happened, because you can't count them as days. Now, why is that the case in this doctrine? Because if you count that 1 or 2 days as actual days, when the new moon does come in the next day, there will only be 2 days in between 2 Sabbath days, which is impossible according to the Bible. And that's only if you consider new moon day to be a Sabbath day, because some lunar Sabbath keepers don't consider new moon day to be a Sabbath day. So for them, they will have 1, 2, skip new moon day, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days between 2 Sabbaths, which again is impossible according to the Bible. The scriptures say there must be 6 days between every Sabbath. So to avoid this problem, lunar Sabbath keepers say, oh, those 2 days don't count. Those are just transitional days. Those are not real days. Now, anybody should be able to see that that is nonsensical, and it's definitely not biblical. Where are all these extra days at in the Bible? Why don't we see these transitional days mentioned anywhere in the scriptures? The reason is because that is a man-made doctrine. There is absolutely no verse in the Bible that talks about transitional days where the moon is dark and therefore those days are not counted as actual days. That is nowhere in the Bible. That's just an attempt to try to fix one of the many problems with the lunar Sabbath. However, it's a problem that can't be fixed because it happens every month. There's always 1 or 2 extra days at the end of every month before the new moon comes in again. Always. Now, if those days are not real days, what do you do on those days? Do you rest? Do you work? Where are the instructions in the Bible of what to do with these extra days? There are no instructions because this is a man-made doctrine. Now again, according to the lunar Sabbath doctrine, the weekly Sabbath can only fall on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th day of every month. So if I'm able to show the weekly Sabbath in the Bible even once on a different date, the whole lunar Sabbath doctrine falls completely apart. So let's do it. This is 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 5. It says, "And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field unto the 3rd day at even." So this was the day before the new moon, and at this time King Saul hated David, and David knew it. So he told Jonathan that he was going to hide out in the field until the 3rd day. Let's jump down to verse 18. It says, "Then Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty." Verse 19, "And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone Ezel." Now, let's jump down to verse 24. It says, "So David hid himself in the field," watch this, "and when the new moon was come, the king sat him down to eat meat," meaning King Saul sat down to eat. So this is new moon day, the 1st day of the month. Verse 25, it says, "And the king sat upon his seat as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty." Verse 26, "Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, Something hath befallen him. He is not clean, surely he is not clean." Now, watch this. Verse 27, it says, "And it came to pass on the morrow," this is the day after new moon day, it says, "which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meet, neither yesterday nor today?" So here we see that the day after new moon day was the 2nd day of the month, according to the Bible. So that proves that new moon day is the 1st day of the month. So at this point, it's the 2nd day of the month, and David still didn't show up to eat. So Saul gets mad at David and threatens to kill him. Now, let's jump down to verse 34. It says, "So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month. For he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame." Verse 35, "And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field," watch this, "at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him." Remember, they had planned to meet on the 3rd day in verse 5. So that's what's happening now. Let's jump down to verse 42. It says, "And Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of Yahweh, saying, Yahweh be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city." So David left. Now let's pick it up at 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1. It says, "Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee?" Verse 2, "And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. So David told the priest that Saul sent him to do some business, but actually David was on the run. Now, watch what David says next. Verse 3. Now therefore, what is under thy hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. So David asked the priest for 5 loaves of bread because he and his men was hungry. He hadn't eaten because he was on the run. Verse 4. And the priest answered David and said, watch this, there is no common bread under my hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. So the priest told David that he didn't have any regular bread. He only had the holy show bread that he just took out of the temple. Only the priest was supposed to eat that bread, but he told David he would give it to him if he was ceremonially clean. Verse 5. And David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth, women have been kept from us. Watch this. About these 3 days since I came out, meaning since he came out from where he was hiding at. We know he was hiding for 3 days according to chapter 20, verse 19. So this is the 3rd day of the month when he's talking to the priest. Let me read this verse again. It says, and David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth, women have been kept from us. Here it is. About these 3 days since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it was sanctified this day in the vessel. Now, watch this. Verse 6, it says, so the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the show bread that was taken from before Yahweh to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. So the only bread that the priest had was the old showbread that he had just replaced with the new showbread. David showed up right after the priest had changed the bread, and he gave the old bread to David to eat. Now remember, this was the 3rd day of the month when this happened. Now, what day did the priest have to replace the showbread according to the law? Let's see. This is Leviticus chapter 24 and verse 5. It says, and thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2/10 deals shall be in 1 cake. So this is the showbread. Verse 6, it says, and thou shalt set them in 2 rows, 6 on a row, upon the pure table before Yahweh. Verse 7, and thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row. Watch this. That it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So here we see how the showbread was prepared and how it was set up. Now, how often did they have to do this? Verse 8, it says, every Sabbath he shall set it in order before Yahweh continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. So we see here that the priest had to replace the old showbread with new showbread every Sabbath day, continually. So the showbread was changed on the Sabbath day. Therefore, we know that David came to the priest on the Sabbath day when he was replacing the showbread. But we also know that it was the 3rd day of the month, not the 8th day. So that proves that the Sabbath does not always fall on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th day of every month. Therefore, the lunar Sabbath doctrine is wrong. David came to the priest on the 3rd day of the month, and we know for a fact that that was the Sabbath day, because Yahushua used this same story to cut the Pharisees about the Sabbath day. Watch. This is Matthew chapter 12 and verse 1. It says, "At that time, Yahushua went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were a-hungered, and began to pluck the ears of the corn and to eat." Verse 2, "But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day." So the Pharisees told Yahushua that he was breaking the Sabbath day. But watch this. Verse 3, it says, "But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was a-hungered, and they that were with him?" Verse 4, "How he entered into the house of the Most High, and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests?" Now, why did Yahushua use this example with the Pharisees? Because David did that on the Sabbath day, just like the disciples were plucking corn on this Sabbath day. Again, it was the weekly Sabbath and the third day of the month when David ate the showbread. It wasn't the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, or the 29th. So that proves that the lunar Sabbath doctrine is wrong. Because if there is any weekly Sabbath in the Bible not on one of those days, then the whole doctrine falls apart. Let's look at another example. This is Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. It says, "And it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of the testimony." Verse 12, "And the children of Israel took their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran." So we see here that the children of Israel started traveling on the 20th day, and they ended their journey in the wilderness of Paran. Now, let's see how long the journey was. Let's jump down to verse 33. It says, "And they departed from the mount of Yahweh," watch this, 3 days' journey, "and the ark of the covenant of Yahweh went before them in the 3 days' journey, to search out a resting place for them." Now we know from verse 11 that they left on the 20th day of the month. And we see here in verse 33 that it was a 3-day journey. In other words, it took them 3 days to get to their destination. So that means that they traveled on the first day, which was the 20th, and the second day, which was the 21st, and they arrived on the third day, which was the 22nd. So they reached their destination on the 22nd day of the month, which according to the lunar Sabbath doctrine was a Sabbath. The problem with that is, when they got to their destination, they had to set up camp, which includes a lot of physical work. The whole nation was traveling together. It's a very long process to get the whole camp set up. But if it was the Sabbath day, they couldn't set up the camp because you can't do any work on the Sabbath day. So that means that the whole nation would have been in the wilderness without shelter because they could not do the physical labor it took to set up camp on the Sabbath day. Remember, what happened to the man who just went out to gather sticks on the Sabbath day? Let's read it. Numbers 15 and 32. It says, "And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness," watch this, "they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day." Verse 33, "And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation." Verse 34, "And they put him inward because it was not declared what should be done to him." So they found this man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day, and they didn't know what to do with him. Watch this, verse 35. "And Yahweh said unto Moses, This man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. Verse 36. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died, as Yahweh commanded Moses. So this man was put to death for simply gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. But yet the Most High allowed all Israel to work and set up the whole camp on the Sabbath day? Of course not. That doesn't make any sense, because it's not the truth. We know, according to the Bible, you can't do any work on the Sabbath day. This is Exodus 31:14 again. It says, Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. Watch this. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. So no work is to be done on the Sabbath day. You can't have the whole nation in the wilderness setting up camp on the Sabbath day. We saw that Israel got to their destination on the 22nd day of the month. If that was the Sabbath day, they would not have been allowed to set the camp up. Now, the Most High would not put them in that situation where they had to be without shelter. So this proves that the 22nd day of that month was not the Sabbath day, which means that the lunar Sabbath doctrine is wrong. Now, let's deal with creation week. Did the moon exist during the first 3 days of creation? No. Genesis chapter 1, verses 16 and 19 tell us that the moon was made on the 4th day. Look at this diagram of creation week. The moon did not exist during the first 3 days of creation. So here's the question. Did the Most High count those 3 days as days? Yes. So that takes us back to the transitional day problem. Why do lunar Sabbath keepers say that you can't count the days when the moon is in transition, yet we see that the Most High counted 3 full days before the moon even existed? So the transitional day theory doesn't make any biblical sense. Every day is a day, whether the moon is illuminated or not. The Most High made the moon on day 4, but he waited until 3 days later on day 7 to call that day holy. He sanctified day 7, not day 4, and not day 8, day 7. Now, some people argue against this point by saying that the days of creation were not literal days of 24 hours. Therefore, we can't say that he made the moon on day 4. They believe that each day of creation was 1,000 years long based on what Peter said. However, that is not true. Let's go to 2 Peter 3 and 8 to get the proper understanding. It says, But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing. Here it is. That one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So this is the verse that a lot of people use to say that the days of creation was 1,000 years long each. However, that is not what this verse is saying. Notice it says that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, not that it is 1,000 years. When Peter said this, he was quoting from the book of Psalms. Let's go to the original quote to see what this is actually talking about. This is Psalms chapter 90, verse 4. It says, For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. This is the verse that Peter was quoting from. Notice that it says, 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday. In other words, from the Most High's perspective, from his viewpoint, 1,000 years on earth is like one day. Why? Because the Most High is outside of our time. He sees everything all at once. So 1,000 years of our time, from his perspective, is as one day, not that it is one day. Let me give you an example. When we look at this diagram of creation week on the screen, we're able to see all 7 days at one time. Why? Because we're outside of the screen looking at the whole layout. Well, this is the same perspective that the Most High has when He looks at time. Why? Because He is outside of time looking at the whole layout of time. So from His perspective, 1,000 years is as one day. That's what Peter's talking about. So this verse has nothing to do with the days of creation. Those days of creation was 6 literal earthly days. And then He rested on day 7. So again, the moon was made on day 4, but the Sabbath day came 3 days later on day 7, which proves that the Sabbath day is not based on the moon. Now let's move on to another point. Remember, the lunar Sabbath doctrine says that the new moon days are not regular days, even though we already saw that they are. However, let's look at the verses that they use to make this claim. This is Ezekiel 46:1. It says, "Thus saith the Lord God, the gate of the inner court that looketh towards the east shall be shut the 6 working days. But on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened." So they say that 3 different types of days are mentioned in this verse: work days, Sabbath days, and new moon days. Since new moon day is listed separately from the work days and the Sabbath days, they say it has to be its own kind of day. The problem with that is there is no verse in the Bible that says that new moon day is counted separately from the rest of the week. People make that claim, but the Bible doesn't. All days fall on either one of the 6 working days or on the weekly Sabbath day. Now, if a feast day falls on a normal work day, the rules attached to that feast day override the rules of that work day because it's a special occasion. That's why the Most High tells us on specific feast days not to do any work. Why does He have to say that? Because those days are normally work days. But feast days are special to the Most High, so they override the rules of a normal work day. Now, let's read this verse again because there's another question that has to be addressed. It says, "Thus saith the Lord God," watch this, "the gate of the inner court that looketh towards the east shall be shut the 6 working days. But on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened." So a lot of brothers say this is impossible on a normal calendar, because if the new moon falls on a work day, how can you open the gate when it's supposed to be shut on working days? But again, this is easily explained. It's the same situation as the feast days. Let's look at a normal 7-day week. Now, the new moon is a special occasion that only happens once in a biblical month. So if the new moon happens to come in on one of the normal work days, because it's a special occasion, you can open the gate, even though it's a normal work day. New moon day overrides the rules for a normal work day, just like the feast days do. Watch this. This is Leviticus 23:27. It says, "Also on the 10th day of this 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. And it shall be an holy convocation unto you. And ye shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh." Verse 28. "And ye shall do no work in that same day." Why? It says, "For it is a day of atonement to make an atonement for you before Yahweh your God." Now, why did the Most High have to tell us not to work on this day? Because it's a normal work day. But because He gave us the Day of Atonement to keep, the rules for a normal work day no longer apply. This is the same thing that's happening with the new moon day in Ezekiel 46:1. New moon day is not a special category day. It's listed separately because new moon day is an exception to the rule of the gate being closed. Just like the Day of Atonement or any other feast day overrides the rules for a normal work day. Now, before I continue, there's something that has to be explained. Many people don't realize that there are two different types of days translated as Sabbath in the Bible. When you deal with the weekly Sabbath, the Hebrew word is Shabbath. When you deal with the yearly Sabbaths, like the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Tabernacles, for example, the Hebrew word for those Sabbaths is Shabbathwan. Now, in both cases, the word is translated into English as Sabbath, but there is a difference between a Shabbath and a Shabbathwan. For example, on a Shabbath day, like the weekly Sabbath, you can't cook, you can't kindle any fire at all, you can't gather sticks, you can't carry burdens out of your house, you can't do any manner of work at all. However, on a Shabbathwan day, you can cook, you can kindle fire, you can gather sticks, and you can carry burdens. But again, there's no distinction of these types of days in the English. It just says Sabbath for all of them. But in the Hebrew, one says Shabbath and the other says Shabbathwan. Let me give you an example. This is Exodus 35:3. It says, "Ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day." So this is the weekly Sabbath. Now, if you can't kindle fire, obviously that means you can't cook either. Let's look at the word Sabbath in this verse. Notice it's the Hebrew word Shabbath. So we see that you are not allowed to cook or kindle any fire on a Shabbath day. Now, let's go to Exodus 12:3. This is in reference to the Passover and unleavened bread. It says, "Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house." So we had to choose a lamb for the Passover. Let's jump down to verse 6. It says, "And ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening." So we kept the lamb until the 14th day of the month at evening, which is the Passover. When the evening came, which starts the 15th day, we killed the lamb. So obviously, after we killed it in the evening, we had to cook it. Watch this. Let's go down to verse 8. It says, "And they shall eat the flesh in that night." Here it is. "Roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it." So we were allowed to cook and kindle fire on this day. Let's go down to verse 10. It says, "And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning." We had to eat all the lamb that night. But if we didn't eat it all, it says, "And that which remaineth of it until the morning," here it is, "ye shall burn with fire." So again, we were allowed to cook and kindle fire on this day because it's not a Shabbath day, it's a Shabbathwan day. Even though the English only says Sabbath, there is a difference. Now remember, on the weekly Sabbath or the Shabbath, when they found a man gathering sticks, they stoned that man to death because you can't gather sticks on the Shabbath day. But let's look at the Feast of Tabernacles. This is Leviticus 23:39. It says, "Also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto Yahweh 7 days." So this is a yearly feast. It says, "On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath." So we see that the first day and the 8th day of this feast is a Sabbath. Watch this. Verse 40. And ye shall take you on the first day, which is a Sabbath, it says, the boughs of goodly trees, watch this, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before Yahweh your God 7 days. So, not only did we gather sticks on this Sabbath, we gathered whole branches to build shelters to dwell in. Now, why were we able to do this? Let's look at the word Sabbath in verse 39. Here's the verse with the Hebrew showing. Notice that the word for Sabbath in both places is Shabbathwan. See that? On a Shabbath day, you can't gather sticks or do any work. But on a Shabbathwan day, you can do work as long as it's not servile work. Watch this. This is Leviticus 23 and 34. It says, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto Yahweh. So again, this is the same Feast of Tabernacles when we were allowed to gather branches to make shelters to dwell in. Watch this. Verse 35, it says, On the first day shall be an holy convocation. Here it is. Ye shall do no servile work therein. See that? This is a Shabbathwan day. We can't do any servile work on these days, meaning service work or working for money, but we can do work in connection with the celebration of the day. See, it's important that we understand the difference between a Shabbat day and a Shabbathwan day. No work at all can be done on a Shabbat day, but work can be done on a Shabbathwan day as long as it's not servile work and it's in connection with that particular holy day. So now that we understand that, let's go to Amos chapter 8 and verse 5, because lunar Sabbath keepers often quote this verse, but they miss a very crucial point. It says, saying, When will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit? So they say that this verse proves the lunar Sabbath doctrine because the new moon and the Sabbath are mentioned together. In other words, the people wanted the new moon to be gone because that was the Sabbath day. However, when you carefully research this verse, you find out that the new moon in this verse is a specific new moon. See, the problem is new moon days are not Shabbat days. New moon days are Shabbathwan days. And there's only one new moon day in the year that servile work is not allowed on. Watch this. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 24. It says, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, watch this, In the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, and holy convocation. So here we have specific instructions for the memorial of blowing of trumpets. This takes place in the 7th month on the first day of the month. So we know that this is a new moon day. Watch this, verse 25. Ye shall do no servile work therein. Again, servile work means you can't work for money. It says, But ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So the Most High explicitly told us that we can't work for money on this new moon day. However, this is the only new moon day in the Bible that the Most High told us not to do servile work. There is no other new moon day in the year mentioned with any work restrictions. Now, if every new moon has the same work restrictions, why did the Most High single out this particular new moon to tell us not to do any servile work? Shouldn't we already know that, if this rule applies to every new moon? Yet, he only gives us work restrictions on the memorial of blowing of trumpets new moon day. Watch. Let's go to Numbers 10 and 10. It says, also in the day of your gladness and in your solemn days, watch this, and in the beginnings of your months. So this is on new moon days. It says, ye shall blow with trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before your God. I am Yahweh, your God. So the Most High told us to blow trumpets every month on new moon day. But notice, he didn't give us any work restrictions, except for in the 7th month, which is the memorial of blowing of trumpets. See, the memorial of blowing of trumpets is the new moon that Israel is complaining about in Amos chapter 8 and verse 5. That's not talking about every new moon, because work restrictions was not given to us on every new moon. Watch this. Let's go to Numbers 28 and 11. It says, and in the beginnings of your months. So again, we know that this is new moon day. It says, ye shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 young bullocks and 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without spot. Again, the Most High gives us precise instructions on how to do the offerings on these new moon days, but he doesn't say anything at all about not working. But watch this. Let's go down to verse 17. It says, and in the 15th day of this month is the feast. 7 days shall unleavened bread be eaten. So this is the feast of unleavened bread, which we know is a Sabbath one day. Verse 18. And the first day shall be an holy convocation. Watch this. Ye shall do no manner of servile work therein. See that? When the Most High doesn't want service work to be done on a specific day, he tells us. But he didn't do that with every new moon, because every new moon doesn't have a servile work restriction on it. However, the memorial of blowing of trumpets does. Watch this. This is Numbers 29 and 1. It says, and in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, ye shall have an holy convocation. Watch this. Ye shall do no servile work. Why? It says, it is a day of blowing the trumpets unto you. See that? Whenever we read about this specific new moon day, the memorial of blowing of trumpets, in the 7th month on the first day, we see a servile work restriction attached to it. But at the start of all the other months on new moon day, the Most High doesn't give us a servile work restriction. Why? Because again, the memorial of blowing of trumpets is the only new moon day that servile work is not allowed. So precept upon precept, this is the new moon that Israel is complaining about in Amos chapter 8 and verse 5. So, as we have seen, the lunar Sabbath doctrine is flawed on many levels. I showed you in the beginning that the weekly Sabbath fell on the 3rd day of the month when David went to the priest and ate the showbread, and that debunks the whole theory that the Sabbath day has to fall on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. We then saw that on the 22nd day of the month, Israel got to their destination and had to set up camp, which would have violated the laws of the weekly Sabbath. Remember, you can't build on the weekly Sabbath. You can't gather sticks. You can't do any servile work or any work on that day. So the 22nd of that month was not a Sabbath. Also, the lunar Sabbath doctrine doesn't count transitional days as real days. And there is no scripture in the Bible to support that, not one. There are multiple problems with the lunar Sabbath doctrine. That's just a few. So with that being the case, what day is the weekly Sabbath? It's no big surprise. is Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Now, I already know what a lot of people are saying. They're saying, show me the words Friday and Saturday in the Bible. You're not going to find the words Friday and Saturday in the Bible. That's true. And I'm going to address that argument more specifically later on, because it's really not as strong of an argument as people think it is. But again, we don't find the words Friday or Saturday in the Bible, but that doesn't mean that it can't be proven. Because what we can do is link the Bible and history together to prove that the weekly Sabbath is Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. You see, in the very beginning, the Most High created a 7-day cycle, and that 7-day cycle has never been broken, contrary to what people might say. Now, let's deal with some history concerning the Sabbath day. Now, a lot of lunar Sabbath keepers say that Israelites learned the Friday sundown to Saturday sundown Sabbath while we were in the Babylonian captivity. And they say that we're still doing it that way because of that captivity. Now, that's a historical claim. So the first thing that we have to do is prove that that is not true. Let's go to the New Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge. This is volume 10, page 135, in regards to the Sabbath day. It says, "It is now held by many that the Sabbath is Babylonian in origin." So that's the claim people are making. Watch this. It says, "Consequently, the Babylonian Sabbath was a day of penance and the middle of the Babylonian month. So the Babylonians kept their Sabbath day once in the middle of the month." That doesn't sound like Friday sundown to Saturday sundown to me. Let's keep going. It says, "It has also been held that the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th days of the month, designated as ill-omened, were the Babylonian Sabbaths. But for this argument, there is no evidence. In other words, there's no historical proof that the Babylonians kept their Sabbaths on those particular days." It says, "And it must accordingly be assumed that the 15th day of each month was the Sabbath of the Babylonians." This is important because a lot of people are reading random websites about the Babylonian Sabbath and they're getting the wrong information. We see here that the Babylonians actually kept the Sabbath in the middle of the month on the 15th. It says, "This day was reckoned that of the full moon." So their Sabbath day was based on the full moon. Now watch this. It says, "But since the Hebrew Sabbath was not connected with the full moon and was a day of gladness, not of penance," watch this, "and since the Babylonians had no week of 7 days," here it is, "the assumption that the Hebrews borrowed the Sabbath from the Babylonians lacks all foundation." In other words, it's completely false to say that the Israelites changed the Sabbath day to Friday sundown to Saturday sundown as a result of the Babylonian captivity. That is false. That is a lie, because the Babylonian Sabbath was only once a month on the 15th. So the Babylonian Israelite Friday sundown, Saturday sundown connection is a lie. As we read, that argument lacks all foundation. Now, I'm not promoting this whole encyclopedia. There are some things in this book that are clearly wrong. But the point is, Israelites did not learn the Friday sundown to Saturday sundown Sabbath from the Babylonians. Now, I'm going to take it one step further in case somebody is still unsure about that point. Let's deal with simple logic. If the Sabbath day was changed after the Babylonian captivity, that would mean that the Jews who went back into the land after the Babylonian captivity was keeping the Sabbath day the wrong way. Now, if that's the case, why did Yahushua keep it on the same day and same time as the other Jews when he came on the scene? We know that the Sabbath day is part of the law and that Yahushua was sinless. So if the Jews was keeping it the wrong way, he would have corrected them. However, we see him keeping it right along with them at the same time. This is Luke chapter 4 and verse 16. It says, "And he, Yahushua, came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was," watch this, "he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read." Now, when he went in that synagogue, he wasn't in there by himself. The other Jews was there with him. This verse proves that the Jews in the land were keeping it the right way. Because if they wasn't, Yahushua would not have kept it with them. Now, this is beautiful because we have historical records from the 1st century that show us that Yahushua and the other Jews kept it from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. But before I go there, I'm clearing all the objections out of the way. Now, a lot of people talk about the Romans and the 8-day week calendar that they used. So they say the Israelites could not have kept the 7th-day Sabbath based on a calendar because the Romans had an 8-day week calendar. But what they don't know is that the Romans also had a 7-day planetary week calendar at the same time. Look at this. This is a book called Sunday in Roman Paganism by Robert Leo Odom. This is page 77. At the top, you see it says, "Planetary week in the 1st century BC." So this calendar goes back to the 1st century. Down here it says, the Sabine calendar. It says, "In 1795 were found the marble fragments of what is known as the Sabine calendar, Fasti Sabini, in a place in central Italy." So these are fragments of an old Roman calendar. It says, "These portions represent the months of September and October in the Julian calendar. The experts in this type of archaeological finds have declared them to belong to the reign of Augustus Caesar." Now, the Julian calendar was established in 46 BC, but this calendar was established under the reign of Augustus Caesar. When? It says, "And that they were in use between 19 BC and 4 AD. 19 BC is after 46 BC. And more importantly, 19 BC is before the birth of Yahushua, which means that when he came on the scene in the 1st century, this calendar was in use. Now, what's so special about this calendar? Let's go to another book called Famous First in the Ancient and Greek World. This is page 116. The heading says, "The first reference to a 7-day week." So we're about to read about an historical reference to a 7-day week calendar used in Rome. It says, "An inscription, CIL 1.220, watch this, dated between 19 BC and AD 14, preserving the remains of a Sabine calendar." So this is the same calendar. Watch this. It says, "is the earliest known public record of a 7-day week." So this calendar was a 7-day week calendar. And again, the starting point for this calendar is 19 BC. That is before the birth of Yahushua, which means that when he came on the scene, there was a 7-day week calendar in use. So yes, there was an 8-day week calendar, but there was also a 7-day week calendar being used at the same time. Now in this book, they show how the two calendars were used together. It says,